Hey guys, welcome to part 10 of What If Tanjiro Had Hamon. Last time we left off after Tanjiro channeled Hamon throughout the Demon King's body, killing Muzan, and leaving himself lifeless, having used the last of his Hamon and oxygen in the battle, and severely bleeding out. With everyone caught up, let's begin. With the battle now over, the Demon Slayers could finally relax and the Kikuchi would begin to take care of the injured and mourn for the fallen. Refusing to accept treatment, Tomioka would stumble forwards towards Tanjiro's body. The Kikuchi tearfully informed Jiryu that Tanjiro was no longer breathing and had no brother. Not knowing that she had arrived at the scene and was tearfully running for her brother behind him. Lse. Jiryu is greatly saddened, tearing up and kneeling down in front of Tanjiro. He grabs the boy's remaining hand and apologizes for having failed to protect him, saying he was always the one who ended up receiving protection. He apologizes to Nezuko for being unable to protect her brother, not knowing Nezuko had arrived and was running towards Tanjiro crying. Moments before, just as Muzan was disintegrating, Muzan is resigned to his inevitable fate. However, he says that his own feelings are eternal and undying just like anyone else's, and he extends his hand towards Tanjiro Kamado, who was there with him and still alive. As he gives all of his blood to Tanjiro, Muzan says that if the boy survived this he would become the strongest demon ever. Since he was the brother of Nezuko Kamado, who was the first demon to develop an immunity to sunlight and also the only one capable of using the breath style of Yoritichi Uzuchikuni. As he slowly disintegrates, Muzan tells Tanjiro to make his dream come true and destroy the Demon Slayer core in his place. As Jiryu Tomioka kneels in front of Tanjiro and the surrounding Kikuchi shed tears. One of them suddenly gapes in shock as the tumor from Tanjiro's head disappears and he opens his eyes to reveal a demonic gaze. To everyone's shock, Tanjiro regenerates his left arm and swipes at the Kikuchi next to him, but Jiryu reacts quickly and pushes the Kikuchi out of harm's way. The other Kikuchi look on in fear and ask Tanjiro why he is acting in such a manner, as the boy stands drooling profusely, enjoying his newfound fangs and claws. His Demon Slayer mark mutates and grows down to move past the bridge of his nose, with another identical mark growing upwards from his neck to almost meet the other, similar to Kokushibo's mark. Jiryu rushes forward and yells at the other Kikuchi to get away from Tanjiro as the boy looks to swipe at him. Suddenly, the sun shines brightly from the sky and Tanjiro double takes to look at it. He begins to burn and writhes on the ground, with his swipe at the Kikuchi going off target but still managing to rip off the lower half of his mask. As Jiryu gets in front of the Kikuchi, he tells him to run away as he prepares to face this new threat, yelling for anyone who was still conscious to grab a weapon and begin fighting. Everyone else looks on from afar with confusion at the sudden commotion, unaware of Tanjiro's fate when Jiryu suddenly announces to them that Tanjiro has become a demon. He says that they need to pin Tanjiro down and burn him in the sun before he could kill anyone. Tanjiro suddenly attempts to find shade to stop burning, but Jiryu intercepts him by stabbing him from the side and dragging him to ground, with the boy clutching at his hair. Noting to himself that if he had not been interrupted by the sun, Tanjiro would have surely killed the Kikuchi, Jiryu wistfully begs in his mind for Tanjiro to stay who he was and die as a human. Suddenly, Tanjiro stops burning and Jiryu looks on in shock as the boy takes advantage of the Hashira's surprise to swipe at him. Jiryu narrowly dodges, but his chin is grazed as Tanjiro follows up with another swipe that is intercepted by Inosuke Hashibira, who yells his friend and asks him what he is doing. Jiryu attempts to stand up but feels dizzy from his blood loss and cannot do so. Inosuke stands over him and tries to remind Tanjiro that Jiryu is their ally as Zenitsu Agatsuma approaches the scene, supported by a Kikuchi. Tanjiro crouches down and a third Demon Slayer mark appears from the other side of his head and he bares his fangs at Inosuke, who can only look on quietly at what has become of his friend. Zenitsu looks on in disbelief at the scene and says that everyone is tired and unable to continue fighting, asking for Tanjiro to think of Nezuko. Tanjiro leaps forward to attack Inosuke, who prepares to fight him. Inosuke thinks back to his time together with Tanjiro and says that they are all comrades, like brothers who would pull each other back if one of them started going down the wrong path. Steeling himself by thinking that no matter how difficult it was, they would always walk the right path. Zenitsu yells at Tanjiro to stop as Inosuke thinks to himself that he would strike Tanjiro down and stop him. Suddenly hit by a memory of Tanjiro offering him some fish to eat together with a smile on his face, Inosuke stops mid-swipe at Tanjiro's neck and is unable to complete his attack. Tearing up and saying it was no use and that he could not attack Tanjiro. Jayuta Myoka, Inosuke Hashibira and Zenitsu Agatsuma look on in shock as Nezuko Kamado runs forward and hugs the now demonified Tanjiro Kamado. As he sinks his claws and fangs into his sister, she begins to bleed, but Tanjiro does not proceed to drink her blood. Instead, the Hamon flowing from his body heals the wound, despite Tanjiro's grip not loosening. Crying, Nezuko hugs Tanjiro and apologizes to him for all the hardships he had to endure to make her human again. She encourages him to resist becoming a demon and says that going through all the suffering was quite difficult, but to never give up. As Nezuko tells him to come home with her, Tanjiro starts sinking his claws in deeper and lets out a wild howl. Inosuke and Zenitsu rush forward to help Nezuko and to try and bring their friend back. Zenitsu grabs Tanjiro from behind and begs him to stop hurting Nezuko and that she had become a human again. As he tells him that she might die if he continued further, Tanjiro lets out another howl, but this time is interrupted by Inosuke repeatedly hitting him on the head. Saying that Tanjiro was not the kind of person who would hurt his sister, Inosuke tells his friend to snap out of it and to go back to being his usual kind self. Angered, Tanjiro lets out another feral howl and sends out a shockwave that flings Inosuke, Zenitsu, and Jiryu back as Nezuko desperately clings onto her brother. She falls to the ground as Tanjiro gets on all fours and releases bone whips, similar to those of Muzan Kibuzui, from his back. She begs him to keep fighting his newfound demonic tendencies, however, he still swings a whip towards Zenitsu. Jiryu intercepts the attack by performing the water-breathing, fourth form, striking tide, saving Zenitsu and the Kikuchi, propping him up. Thinking to himself that things had progressed too far, with Tanjiro having bitten into Nezuko and learning the taste of blood, Jiryu aims to kill Tanjiro. However, the water Hashira acknowledges that neither bright red blades nor the sun would work on Tanjiro anymore, leaving him virtually indestructible. Suddenly, Tanjiro charges up a ball of pure energy from his mouth. Nezuko sees this and desperately tries to stop her brother from committing any murders. Telling him that he has to stop, Nezuko puts her hand in front of Tanjiro's mouth to block the attack and it goes off course, hitting the ground instead. Jiryu is able to dodge as Zenitsu calls out to Nezuko in concern. Her entire left hand and forearm begin to bleed profusely as a result of blocking the attack, and she yells at her brother to stop again as he gets on all fours. Once again, the Hamon emanating from Tanjiro starts to heal Nezuko, however it also burns her slightly. Attempting to stop him from using his whips, Nezuko puts her hand on her brother's back and Tanjiro is only able to strike the ground again. Looking on in shock, understanding begins to dawn on Jiryu as he sees that somewhere inside, Tanjiro was fighting his demonic urges, as he was always avoiding doing any lethal damage to Nezuko. Jiryu decides to try and bring Tanjiro back to his senses, though he is unsure whether he would be able to perform such a miraculous feat. Meanwhile, from behind the shade of a nearby building, Ushio looks on at the scene, cursing Muzan for continuing to torment people even after his death. Seeing that his blood demon art would disintegrate with sunlight, Ushio feels powerless to stop the carnage. Suddenly, he sees Kaneo Zuiori limping forward to the scene of the battle, using Hamon to heal her wounds to the point she could withstand a short fight. Looking on at the sight of the two siblings, Kaneo tears up and feels sorry for them. She reaches for a vial of medicine in her front pocket and is relieved to find it undamaged. Thinking back to when she received it from Shinobu Koko, Kaneo remembers the former insect Hashira telling her that she had made an extra vial of Tameo's medicine in the fear that there might not be enough left for Nezuko once things had settled. Quickly analyzing Tanjiro, Kaneo assesses that since he had still only just become a demon, she would be able to dodge his attacks. Kaneo activates the flower-breathing, final form, Equinoctial Vermilion Eye, using Hamon to constantly heal the damage done by her own power, leaving her vision clear and untarnished. And charges forward to Tanjiro with Jiryu doing a double take and recognizing the move as Kani's. Tanjiro swipes at Kaneo but she evades it by backflipping over the boy and injects the medicine into him, just as he redirects his arm and then slashes at her torso. As she begins to bleed, Kaneo tells Tanjiro that it is enough and it is time for him to come back to them, saying that he must not make Nezuko cry. Kaneo falls to the ground with a thud as something begins to stir inside Tanjiro's consciousness upon hearing Nezuko's name and the medicine begins to take effect. Nezuko Kamado tearfully calls out to her brother Tanjiro Kamado to return so that they may finally return home. Tanjiro stirs in his subconscious and responds that he is very tired and wishes to return home as well. Tanjiro prays to God to return home, saying he only wants to go home with his little sister, as he raises his arm to reach forward. Eyes grow on the flesh growths that cover his body and begin to speak. The voice of Muzan Kibuzui attempts to dissuade Tanjiro from returning to his loved ones, asking what would happen after he returned to them. Muzan tells him that his entire family is dead and there is no point in him returning home, but Tanjiro responds that he still has memories of happy days there. He tells the Demon Lord that the memories will never disappear as long as he and Nezuko are alive and that is why he has to go back. Tanjiro continues to slowly reach forward. As Muzan tries harder to dissuade Tanjiro, he lies to him and says that the boy has killed Nezuko. Unpersuaded, Tanjiro calls Muzan's bluff and says that Nezuko is alive, telling him he lies. His deceased friends then all give him a push to the back to raise him up. Muzan tells them not to interfere and continues to try and mislead Tanjiro, saying that they all now hate him and don't want him to return for what he has done after becoming a demon. Muzan continues to discourage the young demon slayer. Tanjiro responds that he wants to apologize to everyone for hurting them and Muzan retorts that they would not forgive him. Then telling the demon that it was not for him to decide, Tanjiro perseveres and continues to move forward, saying that he could smell all of his friends being concerned for him. Growing more frustrated, Muzan tells Tanjiro to be silent and says that he is the inheritor of his will, so he should not look forward or try to find hope but instead should embrace life as a demon. Telling the boy that he would die in a few short years as he had manifested the demon slayer mark, Muzan urges him to think only of himself and live forever. However, the boy refuses and says that he never wanted to live forever and that he only wanted to return to his friends and live as a human. Adamantly refusing to give up on trying to mislead Tanjiro, Muzan tries to manipulate him further and asks if the boy really wishes to return to life after everyone else had died. Grabbing his head in his hands, he asks Tanjiro if he wants to live on without losing anything. More hands push Tanjiro forward and he smells the scent of wisteria flowers, at first believing it is Shinobu Koko, and he tears up as he sees Nezuko's arms reaching out for him. Reaching forward himself to meet her, Tanjiro grasps Nezuko's hand and she attempts to pull him forward but Muzan grabs his arm and tries to force him away, saying that they had finally conquered the sun and that Tanjiro would go with him. Saying that he was a rare being, Muzan tells him to hear the cries of the dead and that they all resented him for being the only one who could move on and keep his life. Rebuffing this, Tanjiro says that they were not such people and that instead they had been willing to sacrifice their lives for others, saying that while they were sad and suffered, they did not wish that for others. As Tanjiro begins to be taken away, Muzan grabs at his torso and tries to pull him back, but in vain, as the hands of Jyuta Myoka, Zenitsu Agatsuma and Inosuke Hashibira join Nezuko's to pull him up. As even more hands reach out to pull Tanjiro up, Muzan finally loses his grip and Tanjiro regains consciousness to find Nezuko looking down on him with tears in her eyes, with his friends and the Kikuchi surrounding him. Nezuko calls out Tanjiro's name and he apologizes to everyone for having brought them harm. Everyone begins to cheer upon hearing his voice and Inosuke tells Tanjiro that he hadn't caused him significant harm at all. Zenitsu begins sobbing and says that he would make Tanjiro pay for his entire life for what he had done to him and calls Nezuko his wife, much to her shock and consternation. Jyu heaves a sigh of relief and a Kikuchi holds him to keep him stable. As Nezuko hugs her brother, they both smile through their tears and a Kikuchi wakes Kaneo Zuiori up to tell her the good news. Kaneo regains consciousness and smiles as she looks on at Tanjiro, with Tanjiro thinking to himself that he was glad she was still alive. Inosuke grabs Tanjiro's head and begins to sob as Yoshio pulls out Tameo's hairpin and begins to weep, saying that it was finally over. 3 months after the battle against Muzan Kibuzui, the world is now free of evil demons and the survivors of the battle resolve to continue living despite all they lost. Tanjiro Kamado recovers at the Butterfly Mansion and sees the cherry blossoms in bloom alongside Nezuko Kamado. Inosuke Hashibira and Zenitsu Agatsuma sleep peacefully at the other end of Tanjiro's bed as Nezuko says the flowers look very pretty. Examining Tanjiro's left hand, Nezuko states that the healing capabilities of Hamon truly are amazing, as after the fight, his arm was horribly shriveled up. And he couldn't feel anything of his left arm beneath the elbow, so it was believed he wouldn't be able to use the hand anymore. However, over the past 3 months, Kaneo, Aoi and herself had constantly been using Hamon on his injured arm while he slept. Every day until now, while his arm was still numb and would never return to full strength, could still move and is stronger than an average human's. Then he points to his right eye and says that while it looks okay, he cannot see much out of it still despite the Hamon healing due to how delicate human eyes are, so after they are damaged severely it is harder to heal them than to grow back a completely new one. With the Demon Slayers now disbanded, Tanjiro got married to Kaneo and moved back into his family house to start a family of his own. Okay guys, this is the end of the final part of What If Tanjiro Had Hamon. Sorry for the long delay. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing. With that out the way, this is Demonic Saiyan saying peace.